snap. The kick is in the air, and the kick this time is no, sir-ree. No, sir-ree. Final score, Tennessee 20, Florida 17. Pandemonium reigns.
You're listening to the RTI Podcast, powered by RockyTopInsider.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome in to another episode of the RTI Podcast. I am Nathaniel Rutherford, the managing editor of RockyTopInsider.com, joined again by Ben McKee, our staff writer here at RTI. We really appreciate you guys tuning in for another episode here of the podcast. Ben, I'm not even going to do a bunch of the intro stuff. We got to get right into it. We got a lot to talk about. We were not going to be able to talk about everything that we want to talk about in this podcast because we'd be sitting here. I mean, you and Swain held a 3-hour show, and you all didn't get to talk about everything that was worth talking about in the game from Saturday against Alabama. So we're not going to be able to cover it all even in an hour. And I don't necessarily maybe want to go in a whole hour, but in 45 minutes or so, however long we're going to go in here, we're not going to be able to cover everything we want to cover. So let's hop right into it. Tennessee loses 35-13 to Alabama. It was closer than what the final score is going to look. If you're just looking at the final score, you're going to think, okay, well, Bama kind of handled their business against Tennessee again. No, there's a chance for Tennessee to make it a one-score game in the fourth quarter. Obviously, it didn't pan out, and we'll kind of talk on that here in a little bit. Ben, I went at length about that and a bunch of different stuff in the post-game show. I know you were busy, obviously, in Tuscaloosa doing, getting videos and stuff from Pruitt, from the players, and the post-game stuff. You put out a video that it kind of went viral a little bit of Butch Jones, embracing some of his former players at Tennessee after the game. So you were busy doing that. I was doing the post-game show, and this is our first time you and I have been able to kind of sit down and talk about the game together. I don't want to do a whole rehash of, kind of another post-game reaction thing, but I want to hit some of the main points from this game. One of the first things that comes to mind from the game, other than the Garantano play on fourth down in the fourth quarter, is the officiating. I want to start with that. I want to start with talking about how just big of an impact the officiating had in this game. Your thoughts in general on the officiating, because you were there in person. I was watching on TV along with probably a lot of the other people listening to this podcast. So, I have the same kind of views as they did, and the same kind of, interaction with the whole thing as a lot of the fans who are listening to the podcast did. I thought it was one side. I thought there are definitely some calls that were called against Alabama that I didn't think were good calls. That one that stands out to me was the pass interference that was called on one of the Tide secondary players when I don't think the pass was catchable, but they called a pass interference call, and I didn't think that was a good call. There were some calls against Alabama that I thought were just, maybe not good. But I do genuinely believe this game, I don't think it was rigged. I don't think the officials are being paid off. I don't necessarily buy into a big conspiracy theory that the SEC is always going to favor Bama. But I do think there's bias towards really good teams in most things. I heard David Ubben of The Athletic describe it as, you can compare it to the NBA, where there's probably, whether or not the officials will acknowledge it, there's probably a bias towards, the superstars like the LeBron James and guys like that in the league, where they're going to get some more favorable calls. I think it's for sure true in sport just as a team in general. I think the teams like the Alabamas, the Clemsons, the Georgias, I don't think maybe it's even conscious by the officials, but I think there's a bias. There's an Alabama bias. And boy, it felt like there was one on Saturday. I don't know that I don't think I would put the officiating as the number one reason Tennessee lost, because Tennessee still made some mistakes on their own and cost themselves the ball game. But to me, it's one of in my opinion, it's one of the top 3 reasons Tennessee lost the game on Saturday. It was that bad. It didn't, I think, as you put it on the Swain event this morning, it may have not taken points off the board for Tennessee, but it put points on the board for Alabama in a couple different instances.
Yeah, I don't at all think the officiating lost Tennessee the game. What it did was it prevented Tennessee from having a chance to win the football game. Yeah. And you kind of alluded to my point this morning. Tennessee wasn't able to or the referees didn't take points off the board for Tennessee, but they definitely took points off the board for Tennessee's defense, in the sense of it put points on the board for Alabama's offense. I mean, you look at the biggest call of the game was the Darrell Taylor roughing the passer, or unnecessary roughness, whatever you want to call it, which was not unnecessary roughness. That was Jeremy Pruitt's words during his Monday press conference, saying that it was not a penalty. It's as simple as that. It was a soft call. It was a ridiculous call. You don't call that, especially when earlier in the game, Alabama inside linebacker Shane Lee shoves Brian Maurer, a good 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi after he lets go of the football, and that results in Brian Maurer getting a concussion. But that is not unnecessary roughness or roughing the passer. So if you're not going to call it then it should not be called for a tic-tac play later in the game. And then maybe if the role is reversed and Alabama was called for a penalty when Brian Maurer got hurt, then maybe I understand doing it more so later in the game, because you did call it earlier in the game. The only thing I want is consistency. That's the main thing. But at the end of the day, that call on Darrell Taylor was just flat out terrible. It just simply was not the correct call, and Tennessee was going to get the ball back down 21-13 midway through the third quarter in Tuscaloosa to the number one football team in the country. But instead, the referee decides to throw the penalty, call the penalty, and instead, Alabama, instead of having a punt on fourth down, they have an automatic first down plus 15 yards, and then Tennessee's defense could not get a stop to save their life, so Alabama drives down the field and scores a touchdown. So instead of Tennessee getting the ball back down 21-13 with a chance to tie it late in the second half, it turns into a 28-13 football game. And so, again, there's no guarantee that Tennessee would have got the ball back and scored a touchdown to tie it. So I'm not willing to say that the calls cost Tennessee the football game, because Jarrett Garantano was in the football game. I mean, it's really as simple as that. There's no guarantees with JG, unfortunately. But, again, it did not cost Tennessee the game, but it cost them a chance to pull off the upset. Because if you go back in, you look at the second half, I believe Alabama scored 14 points in the second half. 7 of them were after the Darrell Taylor penalty, where Tennessee should have gotten off the field. Alabama should have punted right there, but instead they throw the penalty, they go down and score a touchdown. That's 7 of the 14 points. And then the other 7 was on the Jarrett Garantano fumble at the goal line. So you you take that into consideration and think that, okay, maybe if Tennessee gets the ball back and they score right there and Jarrett Garantano doesn't fumble at the goal line, all of a sudden Tennessee's winning that football game with 5 minutes to go in the game. So, again, there's no guarantees that Tennessee would have scored, but ultimately my thoughts on the referees, and there's 1,000 calls we could go through, but obviously the Darrell Taylor one is the one that stands far and above the rest, in my opinion. So that's kind of the one that I just highlighted, but there were several to go over. But those calls didn't cost Tennessee a win. It cost Tennessee a chance to win the football game, because there is no guarantee that JG would have turned around and they would have scored. I mean, he could have drove them down the field and had a second fumble at the goal line by the way he was playing. So it definitely cost Tennessee a chance to win, and that is frustrating because you had the number one team in the country on the ropes. You were punching them square in the mouth. You were out-coaching them. You were outplaying them in the sense of you were playing with more effort. You were pushing them around in the trenches when Tennessee had the ball on offense. Defensively, you had Mac Jones a little flustered. It's just frustrating when you look back at those calls, because it definitely changed the trajectory of the game. It absolutely changed the momentum. When Tennessee got that stop on third down on the play where they called Darrell Taylor for unnecessary roughness, Tennessee had so much momentum, and the ref deciding to throw that flag just completely killed that momentum. I mean, it completely changed the game, because people will say, well, Tennessee didn't stop them after the penalty. Tennessee's defense had played really good for 2 or 3 consecutive series, and I 100% believe that the reason Alabama was able to drive down the field and score after the Darrell Taylor penalty is because they were just stunned at that play, at that call. They were just shocked, and in their minds, they had gotten off the field, which they should have, and it's hard to just regroup and readjust your focus in a split second. So it just completely changed the trajectory of the game, and it is very frustrating because I 100% believe that if Brian Maurer plays the whole game, if Darrell Taylor isn't called for that ridiculous penalty, then Tennessee has a chance to win the football game late. And yes, part of that is because, well, Tua got hurt, and yeah, that's a part of it. And let's also remember, though, that while Tua was knocked out of the game due to injury, and Tua probably would have gone on to score 50 points. I'm not debating that. But let's also remember that Alabama had no answer for Brian Maurer to start the football game. Brian Maurer was taking it to Alabama's defense. So Brian Maurer probably would not have put up 50 points like Tua. But, heck, with the way he was dealing, the way Alabama's defense has been playing, who's to say he wouldn't have?
Yeah, I think to me, both quarterbacks going down, those are probably the two biggest, I guess, turning points of the game, because Mac Jones didn't play great. He played better than Garantano, obviously, but he still didn't play great for Alabama. He missed several throws, and with the kind of receivers Alabama has, if you miss a throw with them, I mean, you must have missed pretty badly, because they have 4 NFL receivers on their roster, and then you also have Najee Harris and Brian Robinson, who are both really good running backs who are good pass catchers too. Ben, you talked at length there about some of the big missed calls, and you mentioned the biggest one with Darrell Taylor, or not even missed calls, but calls that were called that we both think were bad. One that I still haven't seen an explanation for, and I to me, it's right up there with the Darrell Taylor call. I want to know what in the world happened when the officials ran up to the line to stop Tennessee from calling a trick play. When the play clock was going, the game clock had stopped, but I think the game clock had stopped because Tennessee got in a first. I don't know if it was a clock issue. I don't know what it was, but the officials kind of were pointing at stuff and talking, and I don't know. Pruitt was obviously very mad. I think when it happened, you saw on TV on ESPN, he was sitting there and just yelling at the ref, saying, "What are you doing? Come on! What's happening? Come on!" And he never got an explanation during the game, because I know after the game when you all are sitting there in the media room with them, he mentioned that he didn't know what was going on there. He's like, I don't know why they stopped play. We lined up for a trick play because we saw that Alabama they weren't set, so we thought we had a chance to do something there, but then they for some reason come up and stop it, and it allows them to get set. So Ben, I don't know, have you heard any sort of reasoning on that? Because I still, to this minute of us recording this podcast, have not heard why the officials stopped the play there when they did.
I have not. Nobody has.
That's ridiculous. And I'm of the belief that I think officials need to be held accountable. I know it's a very difficult job, and Pruitt said that, multiple times. He said it after the game on Saturday night, I guess / Sunday morning. He said it today as recording this, it's on Monday. He said it on his Monday press conference that, they're trying their best to make the right plays. I don't think these officials go into a game or go into a play saying, how can I call this in favor of this team, or how can I don't think they're doing that unless they're being paid off, and I don't think that's happening in the majority of games. Especially ones that are concerning Tennessee right now. I don't want to speculate on that, but to me, I think it's ridiculous that officials, if you don't want to put in the collegiate ranks because they're not full-time employees, okay, whatever. But if you want to talk about in the NBA and the NFL and Major League Baseball, the umpires and whatnot there, I think it's ridiculous they're not held accountable and they don't have to answer for what happens in games. I don't necessarily think they need to be sit there and grilled by the media or anything like that, but they should be the anonymity that the college football and NFL referees enjoy. I don't understand it. They're getting paid to do this. They're making calls that affect games, that drastically affects in some instances. In this game, like you said, it didn't cost Tennessee a victory, but it cost Tennessee a chance to win, or a chance to make it really close and put the pressure all on Alabama there in the fourth quarter, or other multiple times in the second half, because that call against Darrell Taylor was in the third quarter at a pivotal point. That play, I'm trying to remember, I think it was that might have been the first half, and I can't remember when that play specifically happened, the one I'm referencing, talking about the potential trick play. But there was just so many times where the officiating affected this game, and like you said, it didn't cost Tennessee a win, and I would still put some Tennessee's mistakes that they themselves made above the officiating, but my goodness, it was bad. And it's bad when you see other Alabama fans and stuff talk about Tennessee getting hosed and some things. Like I said, Alabama had calls go against them that I didn't agree with either. It was bad on both fronts, but it was consistently worse against Tennessee. Tennessee came to this game as one of the least penalized teams in the SEC. They finished the game with 13 penalties called against them for 93 yards. They had 30 penalties called against them in the first 6 games of the season, and they get almost half of that in this one game. Granted, Tennessee did earn some of those. I mean, you had a couple false starts. You had some holdings on offense. You had, I'm trying to think, there was one that Daniel Batuli got called for before his targeting that I think was actually a penalty that was warranted. John Jennings got called for a hold that was warranted as well. Like I said, Darnell Wright, Wanya Morris both got holding and false starts against them. There's a delay of game. Jerome Carvin got called for a hold. I mean, there were things in pass interference on Bryce Thompson. There were things that Tennessee did that they did, were worth being called against. But man, there were instances where 2 or 3 things where you can point to it and say, now wait a minute. And that's what Pruitt said. He's like, there are 3 or 4 things I was wrong at the time in the game of thinking they were wrong, but there's still 3 or 4 things that I totally disagree with on how the calls went. So, Ben, that's one topic. I mean, we could sit here and talk about the officiating for another probably 20-30 minutes in this game, but there's a lot more to discuss from this game. Before we get to the other main topic, I just thought of something I wanted to get your thoughts on, Ben, because it's been another point of contention. Well, I don't know about contention, but it's been a big conversation topic, especially with national media members. I saw today Paul Feinbaum even had a comment on it. He called this embarrassing for Tennessee, and Jeremy Pruitt was Paul Feinbaum's comment, and there's been a lot of other people. Dan Wolken, Tennessee villain, has weighed in. A lot of other national media members have weighed in. A lot of local media has weighed in as well. I'm, of course, talking about the quote-unquote face mask pull. I mean, you can call it a tug, you can call it whatever you want to call it. The Jeremy Pruitt kind of grabbing with a couple of his fingers, grabbing Garantano's face mask after the fumble when he's yelling at him and trying to get him to look at him and not walk away from him. What is your thought on it, Ben? Because I've not really given my opinion on it. I've seen I don't know how many people give their opinions on it on social media, and like I said, Paul Feinbaum just kind of talked about it earlier today too. Before I share mine, I'm curious what you think. I know you all talked about it a little bit on this one of it. I don't remember if you had a chance to weigh in on it or not though. So I want to hear your thoughts on the face mask gate. I don't know what you want to call it. Just the whole incident of Pruitt kind of yanking on Garantano's face mask as he was yelling at him after the fourth quarter 4th down fumble.
I think it's been overblown. I'm not necessarily for coaches pulling on a kid's face mask. I think it's somewhat uncalled for, but I don't think the way Pruitt grabbed JG's face mask was egregious. Like, he barely tugged on it. It'd be one thing if he had firmly gripped it and was yanking him around everywhere, or stuck his fingers in his eyes, or just like stiff-armed him or something along those lines. That is uncalled for. But he like barely. He was just trying to get his attention. Like, I don't have a problem with that. I truly don't. To me, he's just coaching him hard, and that's kind of what Jeremy Pruitt alluded to today. And I know there are people out there that will think it's a stupid way of coaching somebody hard, but I mean, he's just trying to get JG to look him in the eyes. And how many times has JG walked past Pruitt this year and kind of not, stopped and looked at him in the eyes and had a conversation? I mean, frankly, JG needs to be yanked around in that sense, and I say in that sense, in not in a ridiculous tone, not in a ridiculous manner, like I said earlier, yanking on his helmet all over the place and whatnot. He just like barely tugged it, and I think the outrage has been overblown. Quite frankly, I think he's just coaching him hard. I think he's trying to get a point across. I think he's frustrated with the way JG has kind of shrugged criticism off all season long, and it kind of reached a boiling point. But ultimately, I think it's overblown. And again, I'm not a fan of the whole grabbing of the face mask. I do think it's a little over the top, especially like the way Jimbo Fisher did it a couple weeks ago against Arkansas. Really yanked the face mask around. That's when I have a problem with it. But when he's just trying to grab somebody's attention to speak with them, I don't have a problem with it.
Yeah, I think it's pretty well summed up there. I think it's being way overblown. I think there's a lot of people just freaking out over it like it's the worst thing that Pruitt could have done in this situation. And Paul Feinbaum calling it embarrassing to me is an overreaction. I don't want to sit here and call out Paul Feinbaum, and I mean, it doesn't matter. He's not going to hear this. Paul Feinbaum doesn't listen to our podcast. He probably doesn't really know who Rocky Top Insider is either. But I think that's an overreaction. It's not embarrassing. It happened on a national stage, yes, but if I just think it's overreacting. I don't, like you said, I don't agree with it necessarily either. I don't think it was. I think if Pruitt could go back and take it away, I think he would. I don't think he'd obviously take away the verbal tongue lashing he gave Garantano, because JG deserved it from all accounts. Pruitt has not come out and said that he kind of went rogue and made a play that wasn't designed there, but the things he hasn't said and the things that Trey Smith and Brandon Kennedy, did or didn't say after the game, you can pretty much surmise that, hey, there was something there that Pruitt and the players didn't know was going to happen that Garantano did. So I don't think you would take away, like I said, the way he reacted from I'm getting on to you and you're going to hear me, yell at you instance. But I think you might take away the face mask tug. But I did want to bring that up because that's been a discussion, and I agree with you. I think it's being overblown. When I saw it, one of my immediate thoughts was, well, people are going to have an issue with that. I didn't expect people to have this much of an issue with it, but I thought, no, that's going to be a talking point. I'm pretty sure. I think the reaction's been a little too much. I think blowback on the other side's been a little too much. I think people who are freaking out and calling people, names and saying you're way too soft. This is how football should be, and all this different stuff. I think that's also a little bit of an overreaction. I think it's somewhere in the middle. I think it's something that optically, I understand it doesn't look very good, but at the same time, I don't blame Pruitt for doing it either. I think it's just a thing where he was in the moment. I mean, I thought Garantano handled it well too, as far as that's if I'm a player, I get my face mask yanked like that by a coach. I mean, I don't know how I'd react. I'm not gonna say I would. See,
that's the thing. That's the thing. He didn't even yank it, and I know that you're not
right.
trying to say that he is, but that's how people are trying to describe it. And Pruitt didn't yank it. He just he touched it more than anything, and then he immediately let go. It's kind of like cussing. It's like you shouldn't cuss, but it's also not like the worst thing on the planet that you can do.
Yeah, I think it's a good way of putting it. There's, like I said, there's a lot we could talk about there too. Even there's just so much we could talk about from this whole game, and have just multiple podcasts about 2 or 3 things from the game. But we've got to move on here to talk about a couple other things from this game. But I agree with you. I think it's being overblown. It's not great optically, but it's not worth all the attention it's getting. There's a lot of other stuff to talk about from that game, and I think people just like being outraged and like having hot takes, like having opinions. So this is something that can kind of it's I'm trying to think of the word that I'm looking for here. I don't know. It's something that people, like I said, they can just have a hot take about and kind of move on with their business, and it's not going to affect them one way or the other, down the line. Anyway, speaking of affecting things down the line and having a greater impact than just having a hot take, Tennessee's quarterback situation, it's going to be very interesting to monitor this week. Jeremy Pruitt said on Monday that Brian Maurer, he doesn't expect him to practice on Monday. He's still being evaluated by the medical staff, and Pruitt said he expects to know more here, quote, in the next couple of days about what Maurer's health and his availability will be like for Saturday's game against South Carolina. He hasn't come out and said that Maurer suffered a concussion in the game against Alabama, but the fact that he hit his head and he was held out for the rest of the game, I mean, you can pretty much put 2 and 2 together. If he didn't suffer concussion, it was still it was one of those things where he suffered one against Mississippi State, and maybe they're being a little more cautious about it. And if he was exhibiting any sign of symptoms of of any kind of things that you associate with concussions, they're going to keep him out. So maybe he didn't against Alabama. I don't know. Like I said, we haven't been told, but I think it's fairly safe to assume that he did in that game, and he for sure did, because Pruitt said he got his bill wrong, and he also did say he got a concussion against the Bulldogs of Mississippi State. It makes me wonder if they're definitely. I think it's worth having the conversation of Maurer's health, of saying, hey, man, this kid, if he suffered 2 concussions in a span of 8 days or 7 days, it might be best for him, even if he is healthy, maybe healthy enough to play. It looks like he's healthy enough to play. It might still be best for him to kind of sit him out for a game, because you don't want to mess around with concussions, man. That's one thing, especially now with all the research and stuff that's come out about it over the past 5, 6, 7 years. you do not want to mess with the brain, and especially with him being a true freshman. He's got his whole career ahead of him in college, and if he is good enough to into the NFL or something professionally, you don't want to mess with that. So it's worth having the conversation of, even if he checks out and he had just another, if it's a mild concussion, if he had just 2 mild concussions, it's still worth having the conversation of, hey, do we still sit him? Because, 2 concussions in an 8-day span, that's not good, no matter who you are, no matter what you're doing. So that's worth having that discussion there. If he's held out of the game, who starts for Tennessee? Pruitt was asked about that, obviously, as well on Monday. And, if it's going to be Garantano, or if there's going to be open competition this week at practice between Garantano and Shrout, because you saw Shrout after Pruitt lambasted Garantano after the fumble. Shrout came in for the next possession, went 3 and out, and then he came in for the kneel down after Bama drained the clock late in the fourth quarter. Ben, if Maurer can't play on Saturday, and you're playing South Carolina, which is a very winnable game, granted the Gamecocks have been playing a lot better as of late, but so is Tennessee. The Gamecocks went, and Georgia played very poorly, but the Gamecocks took advantage and they beat the number 3 Georgia in double overtime in that game, and then they hosted Florida in a very an ugly game as far as the weather, and that definitely affected things in that game. It affected, I think, Cal Trask, especially in the way he was throwing the ball. But South Carolina's right there in that game too, against a top 10 Florida team, and they were holding their own. They had a lead in the third quarter. Florida comes back, and with a little help from the officials in that game, I don't think it was super egregious, but there were definitely some calls that I understand South Carolina fans being upset about. But they, like I said, they held their own against Florida, and they were right there in it. And then they lost by 11 points in that game, or is it 9 points? It was 11 or 9 points, whatever the score was. It was a close game, and it was probably a little bit closer than even what the final score would have looked like. But if Maurer doesn't go, I'm of the respect of, with what happened with Garantano in the game on Saturday, with the way things went, with the way he reacted, with the way he acted, with the way he played. Even if Garantano, if the coaches think that he gives Tennessee the best chance to win, I don't know that you. It's hard to say, because that sounds like I'm saying that they're, if Maurer can't play and Garantano gives the best chance to win, they don't play him, though they're kind of throwing the game away. I just wonder how much respect or anything he may have lost with his teammates. Maybe he hasn't. Maybe we're looking too much into stuff as far as the way the game went and everything. But I would understand fans being upset if Garantano started over Shrout, but I don't know that Shrout's ready to play. But at the same time, man, Garantano has had one good game against SEC and Power 5 competition this season, counting BYU, and that was the time he filled in for Maurer against Mississippi State, when he was in for 2 quarters essentially. So it wasn't even a full game. It was a good 2 quarters of play, because all he did was hand the ball off in the second quarter. So it was a good 2 quarters of play against a mediocre-ish SEC team. I don't know, man. What are your thoughts on the quarterback situation? Because I almost think it's better if Maurer doesn't go. You might be better off playing Shrout, and then playing and doing. They did this even with Garantano in the game, doing maybe some sort of trick stuff and some wildcat stuff with Jennings or Jordan or something like that. Because they did that a few times against Alabama. Obviously, one of them was a touchdown run by Jennings. They got called back by a hold call by Tim Jordan. But you had other times where Jordan lined up in the wildcat and stuff too. So I almost think if Maurer can't go, unless JT Shrout just has a horrible week of practice, I almost think you try him, because I just don't know that Garantano is going to. I don't know. I've lost pretty much all faith in Garantano this season. That sucks. I said this in the post game. I don't want to just pile on the kid. And you and I both have defended him, from last season. We both came into this season thinking he was going to take a big step forward, and he hasn't, and he's continually regressed. I thought maybe the Mississippi State game would serve if he had to come in games. I thought that game would maybe spur him on to playing better. Obviously, it didn't. I'm at a loss for Garantano, and I just don't know that. On paper, he does give you a better chance than Shrout, because Shrout's kind of a turnover machine for what we see in practice and stuff, and what you've seen in him in games. Against UTC, he had a pick in that game, and he was off target in a lot of throws. But man, I don't know that you can trot Garantano back out there at quarterback with what we've seen from him, especially from the game he played against Alabama.
Yeah. To me, it comes down to whether or not you think JG is the best possible option. If you think he is by far a better option than JT Shrout, if Brian Maurer can't play this weekend, if you think JG's just a head and shoulders above JT Shrout, then you play JG. But if it's 50-50, I think you go with JT Shrout because the stunt that JG pulled off, I don't want to say that he went rogue because when I hear the word rogue, I kind of think of, well, he was doing it to intentionally harm his own. And I don't think JG was intentionally trying to harm Tennessee. Did he make a bonehead mistake? Absolutely. It's one of the worst decisions we've ever seen a Tennessee football player make. And it was a disservice to his teammates. It was a disservice to the coaches. And it was a disservice because, Jim Chaney called a brilliant play. You can go on Jordan Rogers, his Twitter account. He broke it down about an hour and a half ago on Twitter and does a great job of detailing the play and just bragging about the play call. So JG did a disservice to Jim Chaney because Jim Chaney called a heck of a play. And then JG also was a disservice to Trey Smith, who was just competing his tail off on that the whole game. But that particular play, Trey Smith had just baptized somebody, as did several other linemen. So that was a disgrace to the teammates and to the coaches, and a disservice as well because everybody did their job except for him, and also to the fans. More so the players because they're the ones playing the game. But Tennessee had a chance to be down by one score right there if you do punch it in, and if he hands it off like he's supposed to, it looks like it's going to be a walk-in touchdown for Quavaris Crouch. So at that point, middle of the fourth quarter, seven or so minutes to go, it's a one-score game. You have all the momentum. All of a sudden, you have a chance to beat the number one team on the road. So because of that, I do think JG needs to face some type of punishment. It's not the same type of punishment as Bryce Thompson got for, his accusations or any of these other guys, Jeremy Banks when he was on the team. But you just can't do that. A fourth-year quarterback just can't take over the game in his own hands and do what he wants to do unless he's a Jake Fromm or a Tua or a Peyton or somebody like that. Like, you don't have enough clout to be pulling something off like that. So
Nope.
I think maybe a punishment is too strong of a phrase to use, but he should face, a repercussion for it. Like he shouldn't things just shouldn't be the same this week. I mean, he should have to face the choir, so to speak, or whatever term you want to use. He this week should not be, as normal as it normally is after a football game. Like, things should be different for JG. So I say all that to say, if it's 50-50 between Shrout and JG going into the South Carolina game this weekend because Maurer can't play, I go with Shrout almost as a punishment to JG to teach him a lesson that, no, when we call play, you run that play. So, but then again, on the same note, while I kind of think that JG should be punished or whatever you want to call it for it, you're also trying to make a bowl game.
Yeah.
And, I have Tennessee beating Kentucky, Tennessee beating Vanderbilt, and Tennessee beating UAB. That's 5 wins, which means Tennessee is going to have to beat Missouri or South Carolina, which both are very possible.
Mm-hmm.
But South Carolina is probably the best team, remaining that Tennessee is going to face. So at the same time of trying to force JG to face the music that he created, at the same time, if he's head and shoulders above JT Shrout, then he needs to play this weekend because you have to make a bowl game. That is the number one goal right now. So to me, who starts at quarterback this weekend, if Brian Maurer can't go, then it just has to be JG if he's head and shoulders above JT Shrout. I know that's not the popular answer, but that's just the case. And JG is capable of beating South Carolina. Is it likely? Maybe not. Maybe not. And I still have concerns about Tennessee's defense going up against Ryan Helinski. So that is just as concerning. So JG has the capability, has the potential to go out there and lead Tennessee to a win over South Carolina. Those percentages just aren't great. But at the end of the day, the number one objective is to make a bowl game. If you think JG is head and shoulders above JT Shrout, then you play JG. If you think it's 50-50, then I think you roll with JT Shrout and you just kind of follow the same game plan that you did against Mississippi State in the second half. Run, and throw the ball when you need to. Really, that should be the game plan with either quarterback if Brian Maurer isn't in there. But especially if JG or Shrout is in there, you just run, and then when you have to throw the football, that's when you throw the football, and you hope your defense shows up and it doesn't turn into a shootout.
I'll be very interested to see what happens if it is JT Shrout, because, I don't know if we can answer this question, because I was going to ask you what would you expect from Shrout. I don't know if we can answer that. We've seen him in 2 games, and the most we've seen him was against an FCS school, and like I said, you could tell he was nervous in that game and that he had some jitters, and he didn't play great in the little bit he was in that game, but I mean, that was against UTC, and he came in against Bama, and as you said on the show, he made his limited experience against Bama on Saturday. The one pass attempt he took was a really good pass down the line to, I think it was to Palmer, but the Bama corner made a good recovery and ended up smacking the ball away, just in time to otherwise that would have been a good completion, maybe even for a touchdown. But we just haven't seen a whole lot from him. I look at the South Carolina defense, and they're not great. Aside from against Kentucky, and that was when Sawyer Smith is in at quarterback for Kentucky, and I mean, he's just not a good quarterback, and he's been hurt, or whatever you want to say about him. I kind of discount that one. Kentucky had a bad passing game against South Carolina that game, and I don't know how much I would look into that. And they also did have Fromm just playing really horribly, and to their credit though, they picked him off 3 times, and they're there to make those plays, and they helped the Gamecocks beat the Bulldogs. I'm talking about South Carolina's passing defense. But other than those 2 games, I mean, teams have had pretty good luck throwing against South Carolina. North Carolina didn't really have a whole lot of issue passing against them. Kyle Trask, I said he wasn't playing great. Still finished with 4 touchdowns and 200 yards passing. The Gators did in that game, and Missouri didn't have a whole lot of trouble passing against them either. So the opportunity is there for Tennessee's passing game to have, I think, a pretty good game, because South Carolina's passing defense is in the bottom 4 of the SEC. The run defense, you mentioned, does Tennessee just, whoever's at quarterback, if it's not Maurer, if it's Garantano, or if it's Shrout, do they still, I think they do still have kind of a run-heavy offense. South Carolina's run defense, it hasn't been great. It hasn't been, Tennessee 2016 or 2017 bad, but it hasn't been good. Florida struggled to run the ball all season, and they ripped off 154 yards, averaged 5 yards per carry, and they got a touchdown. Georgia totaled 173 yards, only averaged 4 yards per carry, though, so it wasn't super efficient. They got a touchdown. Kentucky, 115 yards, 4.1 yards per carry, and a touchdown. Missouri, 194 yards, but they didn't get a touchdown, and that was kind of inefficient. It was only a 3.6 yard per carry average in that game. North Carolina, 238 yards on 52 attempts, on a 4.6 yard per carry average. So on the season, South Carolina, they've only allowed 4 rushing touchdowns, which is actually one of the better totals in the SEC. The only teams that have allowed fewer rushing touchdowns have been Alabama and Georgia. Georgia still hasn't allowed any, which is ridiculous. Bama's only allowed 3, 1 to Tennessee this past weekend to Brian Maurer. And then they're tied with LSU and Auburn for the 3rd fewest rushing touchdowns allowed. They're giving up a decent amount of yards per game on the ground. They're 9th in the SEC in terms of yards per game allowed with 146, but they're only allowing teams to average 3.99 yards per carry, so essentially 4 yards per carry, which is, I mean, that's not great, but it's definitely, there are definitely worse averages out there, worse totals. They're right around the same kind of thing as Tennessee. Tennessee is allowing 3.98 to South Carolina's 3.99. Tennessee is only allowing about 10, 11 yards more per game on the ground, but they've also given up 12 rushing touchdowns, where, like I said, South Carolina's only given up 4. So I think you're right, Ben. I think if you have, if Maurer can't go, if you have JG or Shrout, I think you've got to, in this game, you got to run the ball probably 40-something times. And that's kind of the same approach that Tennessee took against Mississippi State. In that game, Tennessee ran the ball I think it was 44 times in that game. And really, in general, this season, I think Tennessee's offense has been a little more skewed towards the run. Once Garantano kind of started just playing as poorly as he did. I'm trying to find the actual stats of everything here, of Tennessee's rushing and passing totals as far as the play calls. This season, Tennessee has thrown the ball 186 times. They have run the ball 255 times. So they've definitely been a lot more run heavy this season than they have passing the ball. And I think that's definitely been more skewed that way lately. Because like I said, they ran the ball 44 times against Mississippi State, as opposed to, I think it was 14 passes in that game, and both quarterbacks got 7 attempts. I think you're spot on, Ben. I think if Maurer doesn't play, maybe even if he does play, to try to protect him a little bit because of the 2 concussions he's had. Regardless, I think that whoever plays at quarterback for Tennessee this weekend, I think you have to run the ball more than you're going to throw it in this game, unless you just get behind early and you have to pass it. But I mean, South Carolina probably has to know that at this point too, and they're going to probably load up for the run. And South Carolina has one of the best defensive linemen in the SEC, in Ken Lahr. I think I said his name correctly. I worry in this game, Ben, of if Maurer plays, do they have a strategy of, hey, let's see if we can hit him in the head, cleanly, do it as cleanly as he can, or maybe even take the penalty, because it might be worth it, because Tennessee's backup situation is just so bad. I just think the defensive strategy against Tennessee, it's a little bit easier to game plan for them now, because that they're going to try to run the ball a little bit more, most likely, especially if Maurer doesn't play. But if he does, I mean, they know if they can get him hurt somehow or get him out of the game, that Tennessee's backup situation it's not very good at all. So I worry that moving forward, not just South Carolina, but anybody, be it Kentucky, Missouri, Vanderbilt, even UAB, I think the defensive strategy becomes a little bit easier to devise against Tennessee at this point.
No, I agree with you. It'll be a heavy dose of running the football, trying to limit the decision making if Jarrett Garantano plays, if Brian Maurer does not play, and then obviously if JT Shrout finds a way to enter the football game. I think Jim Chaney will really limit the decisions that JG and Shrout have to make, just because they have not proven to make great decisions all year long. And more so JG, because he's done it in games, but word from the practice field is that Shrout doesn't make the best decisions right now, each practice. And he's still a redshirt freshman, so his mistakes are more excusable than a fourth-year junior making the same mistakes. Quite frankly, they should not be on the same level in terms of decision-making and, being able to decipher through a defense and things of that nature. And so on top of, the poor decision-making from the quarterbacks outside of Maurer, Tennessee's offensive line has really started to play well. Jeremy Pruitt thinks that they played their best game of the year against Alabama. Tim Jordan is starting to play his very best football. The running game is just going right now. It is clicking right now. It is everything you want it to be. There's always room for improvement, but considering where it was to start the year, considering where it was last season, it's where you want it to be. I mean, it's just amazing to me how much they have improved, the offensive linemen and the running backs. So I think the combination of playing a quarterback who has had a terrible season, or a quarterback who is young and hasn't proven that you can trust him within a game, on top of the fact that the offensive line has really come along in just the running game in general, I think we're bound to see 40 to 50 rushes against South Carolina. And that same game plan you saw in the second half of Mississippi State, I think you'll see for 60 minutes against South Carolina. Control the football, run, control the line of scrimmage, and then hope that the defense can bend but don't break. Because even against against Mississippi State, Tennessee did not play perfect defense. There are a lot of instances where Mississippi State would get across the 50-yard line, and then Tennessee's defense would buck up and get a stop. So I think you said it perfectly. We're going to see a lot of the Mississippi State game plan, and that's how it should be, because you can't put the ball in JG's court at the moment. He just is not proving himself. He's having a terrible year, and then because JT Shrout hasn't proven himself, you can't give him the ball and put it in his court either. So I expect them to both receive a lot of help. But at the end of the day, the best thing that could happen for Tennessee is if Brian Maurer plays. And he still has to prove that he's not going to throw 2 red zone, end zone interceptions against South Carolina like he did against Mississippi State. And there is some concern about the running game against South Carolina just because Javon Kinlaw right there in the middle is such a beast, a force. He is a first-round, second-round draft pick waiting to happen. As Pruitt said today, it's probably the best defensive line Tennessee will face this season. So there is some concern. And then I said it earlier, Ryan Helinski and his arm against Tennessee's secondary isn't all that comforting. So I don't believe that the matchups favor Tennessee in this game, but that doesn't mean that the game is unwinnable. If they can control the line of scrimmage, if they can run the ball successfully, don't turn the ball over, limit South Carolina's big play ability, then Tennessee has just as good a chance at winning as South Carolina does.
Well, it's going to be an interesting game to talk about once it gets here. Like you said, we've got a lot of stuff to still try to figure out for Tennessee this week of quarterback play. There's a couple other guys who've got other injury stuff to talk about too. And we did get. I would love to sit here and talk about J.J. Pearson getting to play in this game and actually I think doing okay if he finished with tied for the second most tackles in the game. Obviously, tackles don't tell the whole story, but he actually gave Tennessee useful snaps when they desperately needed some inside linebackers in this game because you had a point in the second quarter where you were without both Daniel Batilli and Henry To'oTo'o. So you were relying on Salome Page, Quavaris Crouch, and J.J. Pearson at inside linebacker in the second quarter and partially in the second half too. So that's a discussion. There's a lot of things we could talk about from this game. I'll talk about things moving forward with Tennessee too. There's a lot to discuss. We'll try to do our best to do definitely 2 podcasts this week and maybe do a little bit more stuff as well. Obviously, we'll have plenty of stuff on the website, RockyTopInsider.com, in terms of writing and things like that. But in terms of audio or video content, I would like to try to push out a little bit more this week because Ben, like you said, we're past the point of Tennessee's season where all these games we were talking about the Florida game and the Georgia game and the Bama game as far as losses before the season where a lot of people thought that's probably almost definitely a loss or it is definitely a loss. We're past that point. Even for me now, I've been kind of circling the Missouri game as an almost definite loss. They just lost to Vanderbilt. That game to me, I still think that Missouri wins it because of the matchups and Missouri's kind of home road splits have been bizarre to watch this season. But that game, if my memory serves, I don't have the schedule right in front of me. I'm trying to pull it up. My internet's being slow. Yeah, it's at Missouri. So that'll be different because the Tigers will be playing at home. I still think that one's a game Tennessee probably loses, but that's a lot more winnable now. If you look at, like I said, they just lost to Vanderbilt. It's not like Vanderbilt has a home field advantage in Nashville either. So I don't really know what the deal was there. I didn't really get a chance to watch that game, so I didn't see what all happened. I'll be interested to talk to people who did watch it, but we're at the point of the season, Ben, where every game is winnable, and Tennessee needs to win. They need to win all but one of them in order to make a bowl game. If they win out, that'd be astounding if Tennessee was able to win out and go 7-5 after the way this season began. But if they can even just get to 6-6 with the way this season started out, that would be a major selling point for recruiting, and it would almost, in my opinion, I think it would maybe make this season a success if you were able to get to that point and get to 6-6 and go to a bowl game. And I think it would be because you're giving these young players extra practices, and I think that would be huge to get Henry To'oTo'o, Quavaris Crouch, even guys who haven't played a whole lot like Chris Akprogane and Elijah Simmons. It'd be huge to give those guys an extra 15 practices and time to kind of develop and learn stuff before the next offseason begins. So, but that's a different conversation. We'll talk about that probably later this week. We'll talk, I'm sure, about the quarterback situation later this week because we'll know more here in the next couple of days. Maurer is not expected to practice today. Ben will be on the scene on Tuesday to see if Maurer is out there on the practice field with the Vols on Tuesday. Be sure that you're tuned in for all our coverage at RockyTopInsider.com. Rocky Top Insider on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube as well. We appreciate all of you who interact with the podcast on YouTube or on our site, or if you're subscribed to us on Apple Podcasts or your Android device. Either one of those, we appreciate all of you who listen along and who interact with us, and let us know what you feel. But until next time, this has been another episode of the RTI Podcast.